If I had to choose between being loved and being feared, I would choose to be feared. This is not the statement of a cruel man, but the way Niccolò Machiavelli looked directly into human nature. Yet there is something few people notice. Those who inspired the greatest fear throughout history were often the ones who spoke the least. They did not argue, they did not explain, they did not rush to prove they were right. In battles of the mind, where power is decided within seconds of silence, the one who loses composure first is usually the one who loses. Friedrich Nietzsche was haunted by a similar idea. True strength does not need to announce itself, because silence itself is already a declaration. People are not afraid of harsh words, they are afraid of what they cannot read. And silence, when you are grounded enough, is precisely what makes others begin to doubt themselves. If you have ever spoken a lot but felt unheard, if you have ever explained yourself to exhaustion only to be dismissed, while others said nothing yet made the entire room feel uneasy, this is not a coincidence. It is a very ancient, deeply instinctive, and extremely effective form of power, the power of silence. This video is not about performing restraint or trying to look mysterious by speaking less. It is for those who want to understand why, in a noisy world, the final winner is often the one who never needs to say a word.
Once you understand that silence is not weakness, the real question begins to surface. Why are humans so afraid of silence in the first place? In behavioral psychology, there is a primitive reflex at work. When people are unsure of their position in a relationship, they speak. They speak to test reactions. They speak to check if the other person is still paying attention. They speak to fill the growing discomfort inside their mind. The brain hates empty space because empty space forces it to speculate, and speculation consumes energy. Silence, therefore, is not neutral as we like to believe. It is a form of invisible pressure. You can observe this clearly in everyday life. In an argument, the person who suddenly starts talking faster and more frequently is rarely doing so because they have stronger arguments. More often, it is because they are losing control. When someone remains silent after you speak, your mind immediately goes into overdrive. What are they thinking? Do they agree? Did I say something wrong? And in that very moment, psychological power shifts, not through words, but through silence. The problem is that most of us were taught that speaking is how we demonstrate value. We explain so others understand us. We speak up so we are not taken advantage of. Yet psychology reveals an uncomfortable truth. The more someone needs to prove themselves, the less power they actually have. Those with real standing do not need long explanations because they do not anchor their self-worth to immediate external validation. When used correctly, silence is not retreat. It is standing still while the other person begins to waver.
There is an important concept in social psychology known as perceived power. It does not reside in your actual position, but in how others experience you. When you speak too much, you provide too much data, and data can be analyzed, challenged, and dismantled. When you speak just enough, or even less than expected, the other person's mind automatically fills in the gaps through speculation. And humans have a curious habit. We tend to value most what we are forced to interpret on our own. This is why, in meetings, the person who speaks last often carries more weight than the one who speaks first. Not because they are smarter, but because they allow others to reveal their thoughts first, placing themselves unknowingly in a readable position. Silence, in this context, is not mere restraint. It is a subtle psychological strategy. At this point, it is important to be clear to avoid misunderstanding. Not all silence creates power. Silence born from fear, silence rooted in avoidance, silence driven by insecurity is not silent power. It is simply withdrawal. The power of silence only emerges when you are internally stable, internally clear, and no longer driven by the need to prove who you are.
There is something modern psychology has only recently begun to explain with scientific language, yet observers of human nature centuries ago already understood deeply. Power does not lie in what you say, but in who is forced to respond first. Niccolò Machiavelli never believed that humans act out of pure morality. He believed they react out of fear, self-interest, and the instinct to survive. In the world he observed, where a single careless sentence could cost a life, those who spoke the most were often the ones who exposed themselves the most, and those who exposed themselves most would eventually be exploited. Machiavelli did not advocate timid silence. He spoke of a different kind of silence, the silence of the one holding the cards. When you have not spoken yet, the other person does not know how much you understand. When you have not reacted, they cannot be sure whether they have crossed a line. That uncertainty forces them to adjust their behavior. At its deepest level, silence is not a lack of information. It is the removal of the other person's control over information.
If Machiavelli viewed power through the lens of survival, then Friedrich Nietzsche looked at it from a deeper layer, inner strength. Nietzsche was deeply unsettled by the image of people who constantly need to speak in order to feel acknowledged. To him, this was not strength, but a sign of dependence. Those who urgently need to be heard are often the ones who are not stable enough to sit alone with their own thoughts. Nietzsche suggested that truly strong individuals feel no need to explain themselves to the crowd, not because they look down on others, but because they do not anchor their value to external approval. In this sense, silence is not a social tactic, it is the natural consequence of a self that has already become whole. When the inner world is no longer chaotic, the outer world naturally grows quiet. When you place these two perspectives side by side, one thing becomes strikingly clear. The less someone feels compelled to speak, the harder they are to manipulate. Manipulation always begins with emotional exposure, and emotion reveals itself through words before anything else. Silence, therefore, is not a communication trick, it is a position in which you do not rush to react, do not scramble to protect your image, and are not afraid of being misunderstood in the short term. In relationships, especially romantic ones, this dynamic becomes even more obvious. The person who texts more, explains more, and worries more is usually the one who is afraid of losing. Not because they love more, but because they occupy a lower position in the balance of emotional power. And without realizing it, they place themselves in the role of the one who needs the other more. Silence, when used at the right moment in a relationship, is not a cheap form of manipulation. It is simply the act of stopping the emotional labor you have been doing on someone else's behalf. When you stop talking and stop explaining, the other person is forced to face the empty space you have been filling for them all along. And many relationships only reveal their true nature when that space finally appears. Of course, silence comes with a cost. When you are no longer easy to read, no longer predictable, no longer eager to please, you will not be as liked as before. Some people will find you cold, some will find you distant, some may even resent you simply because they can no longer control your reactions. Yet it is a fair exchange. You can be liked by many, or you can respect yourself. Silent power is not meant for those who need constant reassurance. It is for those who accept that maturity often comes with being misunderstood. In the end, the most important thing I want you to take away is not speak less. It is a much deeper question. Why do you feel the need to speak at all? If you speak out of fear of being abandoned, silence will feel painful. If you speak in order to control how others see you, silence will feel terrifying. But if you do not speak because you already understand who you are, silence stops being a strategy. It becomes presence. In a world where everyone is fighting to be heard, the person who knows when to remain silent is not weak. They are simply someone who has gone deep enough to understand that winning does not always require making a sound.
This world does not lack people who speak well. It lacks people who are deep enough to not need to speak. Every day, millions rush to make noise in order to be acknowledged, to be noticed, to avoid being forgotten. Yet very few dare to stop and ask themselves what would happen if they said nothing at all. Who would grow uncomfortable? Who would lose patience? And who, in the end, truly needs whom? Silent power is not a tactic for manipulating others. It is the natural result of understanding yourself deeply enough that you no longer live in reaction mode. When your silence comes from that grounded place, you do not just observe the world more clearly, you quietly force the world to adjust how it treats you. You may no longer be as loved as before. You may be described as cold, distant, or difficult to read. But in return, you will no longer be dragged into meaningless arguments, no longer have to explain yourself to be accepted, and no longer waste energy trying to prove your worth. If there is one thing I hope you carry with you after this video, it is not say less, it is this. Pay attention to what begins to grow stronger inside you when you remain silent. Is it calm? Is it clarity? Or is it a fear you have been using words to hide all along? If this video touched something honest within you, pause for a few seconds before moving on to the next thing. And if you want to continue exploring the deeper layers of human psychology, where power does not live on the surface, but in the way we carry ourselves, you can subscribe to the channel, not to watch more, but to understand yourself better. And now, perhaps the most suitable thing to do is simply to be silent for a moment.